Hey, welcome to the Branch Podcast. Today, Anthony and I sit down to talk about deconstruction, something that is very popular in our culture. And what we look at is, are there healthy ways to do it? Are there unhealthy ways to do it? Are there benefits and drawbacks? It's a great discussion, and so we hope that it will be a blessing to you and your faith. And as always, if it is, make sure you share it with family and friends. But thank you for joining us, and hopefully this will be a blessing. So what's the thing that you have constructed in your life that you're most proud of?
The thing that I've constructed,
like built or whatever.
I remember like the first thing that I really built from scratch that I thought was really cool was when Makara and I first got married. I basically built the furniture for our house. So like I built like a dining room table with benches, and then I built like end tables for the family room for like lamps to sit on and stuff. And then I did like it was kind of like an antique, like the table was stained, like a gray stain, farmhouse stain. And then like the tables, I did like a antiquing look where it was like the paint was kind of, you know, like you put that stuff on it, it makes it kind of look old. But just the fact that like I had built them and put them in there. But as far as like from a complexity standpoint, doing, I don't know if it counts as building, I guess it would be like home renovation. But like in that same house when we first got married, when her brother and we completely gutted the bathroom like down to the studs, and I just remembered looking at it and being like, what did I do? You know, because at the time like I was really learning how to do stuff
at that point, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean it was like, okay, if we don't get this back together, we just don't have a bathroom anymore. So but then like putting that back together and doing the tile and putting in a new toilet and all the stuff, like it was cool to be able to look back and be like, yeah, we completely gutted this and then rebuilt it. So
the amount of horror stories I've heard throughout the years of people doing that, getting that far into the project, and then being like months before they do it, years even. And you're like, ugh.
It's amazing what you can get used to also, like in your own house. For sure. You know, like there was projects that even today, like living in a house where there's still a lot of projects that need to be done. I told Makara last night, I'm like, I'm so tired. Like I'll get 90% of the way on a project and then just get like burnt out from that project and move on to something else. And that actually bothers me even more because I'm like, I just need to finish, button up a few things and just be done with it.
Exactly.
So
for me, when our first house that we bought here in Lancaster, we bought a house and it had an upstairs, like it had the stairs that already went up there, but the upstairs was completely unfinished. And so I finished it off. So we moved in, and when we moved in, we didn't have any kids. The next year, Cole was born, then Titus, then Lincoln. And so we needed more space because it was a 2-bedroom house. And so like every single day after work for months, I would just come home, and from putting in the flooring to framing the walls, putting in new windows. I did sub out the drywall because that it was so many angles and stuff like that. I thought this will never look good if I do it. But when it all got done, I mean, I built in dressers into the short walls on the side. Like it just looked so good. Framed all the windows and everything. And it was great. And then the crazy part about this is we bought that house for a certain amount of money. I did all of that. Then the housing market dipped in those years, and I sold that house for less than I bought it for.
No,
yeah, which was like devastating.
Awful.
But it was my father-in-law who helped me digest that, like process it well. The house we bought that we still live in today, we bought so far under market. I mean, it was just silly how far under market. And he's like, you might have lost a little bit of money on that house, but you just bought a house that is going to appreciate really good. And it has. I mean, it was a blessing. But again, all that work was great. The problem with that is it convinced my wife that I can do anything. And so like the problem, I am really good at fixing things like washers, dryers, dishwashers, stuff like that. But we've actually gone to like furniture stores, and my wife's like, hey, could you build that for me? Point at like a nice piece of furniture. And I'm like, no, I don't have the skill, but I don't have the tools or anything for that. But she's like, oh, come on, you can do it. I'm like, no, not a chance.
That is the joke of DIY though, is like, okay, nowadays we live in the age of information. So you can probably find a YouTube video.
Oh, for sure.
The issue people don't realize is how many different specialty tools you need for so many different things. Like, I mean, I'm baffled. I have a lot of tools, and I'm baffled the amount of times that like I go to do a project and I'm like, I don't have what I need for that. Like I need, now granted, here's what I do. I justify it by saying, if I had paid someone to do this, it's still going to be exponentially more expensive than if I just go buy the tool. Plus, so I'm saving money on that, and then I forever have the tool. But the amount of specialty tools it takes to do a lot of different specific things, I think people underestimate. Yeah,
all the tools I have is because of that project upstairs. I mean, same thing. I told Mary, I was like, all right, we could pay someone, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars, or I can go spend $1,000 on tools right now. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm thankful for it because I have all these tools
Yeah,
and I
you still
love
have them.
tools. All right. The reason why I asked that question is today we're going to talk about the opposite of that. So we were talking about construction. Today we're going to talk about deconstruction. And honestly, it's a topic that you can right now get, if you were to even, I think, get on like YouTube or something and search Christian podcasts on deconstruction.
Yeah.
There'll be probably hundreds of them. The reason why I want to tackle this topic is because our podcast is for our community and our audience. And I want to address it because I think it is becoming more and more of a hot topic in our culture of the idea of deconstruction. And we'll give the definitions in a moment, but you're hearing more and more about it in social media. In my opinion, it's being celebrated. It's in some ways almost like an authentic way to operate. It's the more real version of you. And so I want to talk about it. Like, are there good things with deconstruction? Are there bad things?
Mm-hmm.
Are there a healthy way to do it? Is there an unhealthy way to do it? How should we feel in the process when we have questions? So those are things I just want to wrestle with today. And so let me just begin, kind of put you on the spot here, but can you give like a working definition when someone says deconstruction, like what are we talking about when it comes to our belief systems?
Yeah, I mean, the words that I think of would be potentially a stripping away of beliefs, values, certain set of worldviews that you have maybe had for a good portion of your life. So a stripping away, or I would even use the word a re-examining that potentially leads to a stripping away of some of those convictions, beliefs, values, worldview that you've held for, and I would say held near and dear to you most of your life. And whether that be because of your family upbringing, whether that be because of your church environment, or any other spiritual beliefs that you've held, it's usually things that have been deeply embedded in you. Yeah. And honestly, I would say for a lot of people, I think it's why it's become such a big deal. It's because people tie them to their identity, like their sense of self, their sense of how they view the world, how they navigate the world. So I would say it's a re-examining that often leads to a stripping away of some of those beliefs.
Okay, so we're seeing that more and more in our culture, and I think for some people they're celebrating it on the one side because they're like, yes, all of this is fake. People that are anti-religion, anti any really concept of an absolute truth or morality, they're celebrating. Yeah, we should be deconstructing this. But I think that on the other side, in the church world, there's a lot of fear about this. A lot of leaders and pastors are talking about it as in this is a big threat for Christianity. I'll be honest, I'm going to share my opinion, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not 100% against it, the idea of deconstruction. I think not only is there value to it, but I think it's also the responsibility that we have to examine our faith so that it can really become our faith. And that's one of the things that I've seen. Like, so I have two sons that are in college, and one of the things I keep saying to them is I want them not to be so militant about any idea, because as they get older, they might discover that maybe there's some nuance to it, or maybe that even something they once believed, now that they have better understanding, they'll realize there was something about that was false, or maybe completely false. And so I want to have an open mind. And I know one of the things I appreciated, you and Chris both went to the same college. And just speaking of which, if people ask, Chris is on a marriage retreat with his wife. That's why he's not part of the podcast today. But you and Chris both talked about how going to college, one of the things you loved about where you attended is they taught you not necessarily what to think, but how to think. And so in that process, if you're learning how to think, you should then be learning how to deconstruct. Because as you get older, as you take in more information, you will discover that there were things that were taught by your family, by your church, just by the culture that you're in, that maybe it's not valid. So by your nodding, I would say you agree with me on this.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I would view it to give an invitation, or an illustration rather, would be like when you buy a house. So it's like one of the crazy things that happened in the last couple of years with the housing market, some people, to try to acquire a house over another potential buyer, they would waive the home inspection, right? And most people would say that's a terrible idea, because potentially there could be problems with the roof, the foundation, like monumental issues. And why would you want to do a home inspection? Well, you would want to do that so that you're able to examine some of those things to make sure the home that you're buying is solid, right? And I think that's what deconstruction could be, right? In the sense that you're examining the foundation that you've built your life upon. Again, those convictions, those values, those beliefs, the worldview that you've held. And I think it is good for us to examine, to say, oh man, there's some cracks in my foundation here. There's some things that maybe I learned growing up that I don't think that's right, or I don't think that's true. Now, granted, the question behind all this is, what is our metric for that, right? How do we judge what is good, what is right, what is true? Obviously, I think you and I are on the same page. As Christians, as pastors, we believe the word of God is authoritative. And so we want to build our lives on that. But there is nuance within that, again, even how we view certain things, and even, I think, specific preferences or opinions about things that maybe we grew up hearing as being dogmatic. Like these are just, this is just the way things are. So I think it is that idea in the sense of, you want to examine what it is that you believe, and you want to be open to what you're going to find. And I think one of the things we've talked about in the past is, I think the scary thing for a lot of people in this is it does feel maybe like a crisis of identity, that what happens if I examine my life, my faith, my beliefs, my worldview? What happens if I find out that some of the things that I believe or hold near and dear to my heart aren't accurate, aren't true? And I think that can be very scary and unsettling to people, which is why I think, particularly in the church world, when we talk about deconstruction, it's almost always portrayed in a negative. I think the other side of it is, because we've seen so many examples of deconstruction that have led to the full-on abandonment of the Christian faith, that there's not even any nuance in the way that we see deconstruction. So it's almost like it's always negative, in that we view it as a total abandonment of the Christian faith, which I don't think is necessarily, I don't think that has to be true, right? I think there can be a good, positive deconstruction. Like if you grew up in a certain church that maybe held to some doctrines, some beliefs that are actually harmful or unbiblical, I would say to better honor Christ, those are things you should deconstruct from, right? Those are bricks you should remove from your foundation because they're cracked and they're broken, and maybe another brick needs to go in their place. So in that way, I do think it can certainly be a positive thing.
Okay, I do think a lot of people, when they're deconstructing, I think their fear is that the Christianity will be a house of cards. That if you deconstruct this element, then it all falls down. My experience is it's not that at all. My experience is, when I can deconstruct the things that are false, it actually makes the house stronger, not weaker. Because you're taking something out that's false and you're putting something in that is true, and it becomes stronger. But let me ask you this. If someone has, because I don't know that any one belief system in Christianity, what I would ever say, is entirely false, but there are some churches that are going to be theologically better than others, to say it nicely. But what would be something that you would say is so foundational, hold on to this and don't let go of this, and then deconstruct around it? Is there any certain things that you would say, these are just so critical to help you evaluate everything else and build upon it in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think there are certain foundational elements that we find in Scripture. I think God, as the fact that there's one God, right? One God. We believe one God, three persons, but that there's one God who created all things. So He's the source of life, and that gives us a sense of meaning and understanding behind everything else, right? If it's not up to me to kind of figure out what life is all about, like, it starts there. So the foundational building blocks of our lives, our sense of identity, our sense of meaning, our sense of morality, our sense of purpose, all stem from that reality. If God is the creator, and even who is God, right? Like He is the all-powerful creator. He is benevolent. He's good. He knows all things, and He created the world with an intent, with a purpose. He created our lives with a purpose. I think things like the fall of mankind. So like the doctrine of the fall, that we are fallen, that we are sinful, that we are broken, that we the reason why we do what we do is inherently embedded in that reality of our fallen nature. And so we see the things that we see in our world, the things that people do to one another, the things that have been done to us, all of that is a byproduct of that. I think that's an important way to view the world, because so much of our lens in life oftentimes comes from our experiences, and particularly our experiences of pain. So I think that's another one. I think obviously the person of Jesus Christ, who is Jesus, that Jesus is the fullest revelation, the clearest revelation of who God is, that God became man and entered into our world. And so we can know who God is when we look at Jesus in the things that He said, in the things that He taught, in the things that He did. Ultimately, that culminated in His perfect life, but ultimately His death and resurrection. And so looking at that as the center and the heart, what we would say the gospel, the good news that there is a loving God, and because we are fallen, He rescued us. He entered into our world to save us. And I think these are our foundational elements that we need to understand everything else about the world that we live in. So I think when we get into the Bible, though, there's a lot of other nuances, particularly about, I think one of the big ones right now that we're seeing in our culture, and I would be curious as to your opinion about this, but have to do with morality in the way that we live our lives. Granted, I think even some of the things that I mentioned, right? If Jesus is Lord over all, if God is the creator and the foundation of the world and of our lives, then I think we can find the answers to those things from that stems from that. Like if he's the authority, then he understands how life is meant to be lived. And so our lifestyle and our behavior flows from that. But my question to you, even as we're talking about this, would be, do you think that some of the cultural narratives right now, particularly about certain lifestyles and the way that we view things, do you think that that has a lot of bearing right now in the church on why some Christians are deconstructing?
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's in my opinion, looking at the modern day deconstruction, I think a lot of it is coming about from they're looking at the people who's proclaiming the message and they're seeing faults with them. And that's leading them to doubt everything they've said.
Sure.
And then they are hearing a message from culture that's coming along that actually it feels more empowering to believe that the answer is actually inside of you. You get to decide, follow your heart. And on the surface, that really does sound like, what a loving message, what an encouraging message. Follow what's inside of you. Only you know you the best. You know what's best for you. Follow that. And so they're looking at pastors who are faulty, who are broken, who are hypocrites at times, some to an extreme. I mean, there are just awful people in the ministry that do evil, that live evil, that they're in it to deceive people and to get out of it. There is that. But then there's also just people that are trying their best and they're broken and they let people down. There's people who are teaching things that are probably based more on tradition than it is the scriptures. And then they'll evaluate that and discover, well, that's not true. Well, if that's not true and this person's claiming it with authority, then what else that they're saying should I not believe in? So they're tossing all of it. So it really is in a generation of information, more so than any generation in history. We are being bombarded with so many different ideas. And I think a lot of people are ill-equipped to know what's actually even true then. They're just seeing it on social media and assuming it's true. They're deconstructing all of the messengers and therefore all of the messages. And then the world comes in with a what seems encouraging. Follow your heart. Whatever you decide, I'm going to support you. Like that's what the message says. Discover your truth, create your truth. And that feels accepting, loving. That feels safe because you get to define it. And the fact that it's the worst message that can ever be proclaimed, you don't discover that until later, until you build your life upon it, only to discover like, well, that wasn't true either. And so like for me, it's like trying to help people. And this is what I found fascinating. You did such a great job of presenting the foundational things, but what you gave is a presentation of the simple gospel. It's this life-changing thing. But what I found really empowering and fascinating about it is I would say I agreed with you 100%. And you go, okay, guys, think about what was just said. Here's the foundation that is like non-negotiable. This is where you start. Now, once you believe these things, now start building on it. So even if you needed to deconstruct everything, strip it all away, and you get to that place and just rest there for a minute and go, okay, God is real. I am broken. He came to save me. Okay, now let me just start there and go, why does he give that command? So then you start going back to morality and you go, okay, some of the commands that seem restrictive, why would God who loves me and saved me want to restrict me? And that's when you can start to build. But I think in our culture, they're just being told like, that's so oppressive and that is going to hold you back. And I think that's the challenge you have to help people push through is it's not holding you back. It's actually protecting you and leading you to deeper life.
It's interesting. You're talking about really like the dual facet of not only the cultural message of what's being proclaimed, which I agree. I think on the surface, it feels potentially more liberating. That's a word that we use. And also more loving in that, not what I think is the biblical definition of love, which is never divorced from truth. And even that truth is wrapped up in those foundational things of God being the creator and author of life and him essentially being the one who sets the rules to the game. But I think there's this idea that, again, we as a culture today, particularly in the West, in America, like we have defined the standard of morality as actually now, if you went back in time in the 50s, there would be a standard of morality of like, marriage and sexuality and some of these things. Like there's just certain things you do and certain things you don't do. I actually think that the metric of morality today is almost solely wrapped up in how tolerant you are. So in other words, whether or not you're a good person is less about what you do and who you tolerate, right?
100% agree.
And so
yeah.
I think that's one of the issues is that narrative has been reinforced. So I think when people, you combine all of these elements, as you said, they see the cultural narrative, which seems, okay, number one, it's far less uncomfortable. If I don't have to address anybody about their behavior, their lifestyle, I can just kind of empower them to do whatever they want to do. Well, number one, there's no cost to that. I don't have to get into uncomfortable conversations or situations. But number two, if I take some of the things that you mentioned, if I go to a church and I encounter, let's say, people who are just really unloving, like this is the stuff that you see, people that are hypocritical, people that are super judgmental, people that are super unwelcoming, pastors who have moral failures. And so it does, from the outside, then you begin to doubt, okay, is any of this legitimate? Is any of this real? I think the problem with that is then when you go back to some of those foundational things and say, okay, the doctrine of the fall, like that human beings are sinful and broken. Do I mess up? Yeah, I mess up. Okay, other people mess up too. Pastors mess up. Other people mess up. They hurt me. We've all done that. I can recognize that. Doesn't mean it's less painful, but I can acknowledge that's a reality of the world that we live in. Or rather than basing Christianity on the hypocrites or the judgmental people or the pastors with moral failures, I can look at Jesus and say, okay, Jesus is the standard. Right. So if I'm going to base my life on Christianity, well, I can't look at a mischaracterized version of that. I have to look at the main thing. I have to look at the source. And so what does Jesus tell me about the heart of God? When I read about Jesus in the Gospels, what do I see? Right. Because these are truths that I can go back to. What did Jesus teach? In fact, Jesus would have rebuked the same things I had a problem with. Jesus had a problem with religious hypocrites too. Right. And so I think a lot of times we see this stuff going on in the church and we become easily dismissive. And I like what you said earlier, because I had the same thought. It feels like we have a thread that runs through everything. And so when deconstruction happens for some people, it feels like when they pull that thread, everything comes unraveling. And I like the image better of the one that we've been talking about, of a foundation on a house that's made of bricks, right? Yeah. If one of those bricks is broken, if one of those bricks is crumbling or cracked, you don't just scrap the whole house. Right? You don't tear it all down. You fix it. You fix the foundation. And I think that's how we have to look at deconstructive, whether those who are afraid of this conversation of deconstruction because they think it means abandonment of faith, or someone who's going through deconstruction right now to say, just because you are wrestling with one aspect of your life or values or faith or this specific area of Christianity, there might be good reason for that. Right. It doesn't mean you have to scrap all of your faith. It doesn't mean you have to throw all of it away.
Right, because I think one of the unhealthiest ways to deconstruct is in isolation.
100%.
I think you have to stay a part of community, and that's the danger of it is, and I get it, I really do get the tension. If you're a part of a church and the pastor has a moral failure, or you're part of a church and they're judgmental, they act unloving, they let you down. I mean, church hurt, though, that term is starting, I think, to get a little bit unhealthy. And I can come back to that moment.
Sure.
But I think in general, we'll acknowledge it's very real. Churches hurt people.
Absolutely.
They let people down.
Absolutely.
But I think what happens is people are part of that community. The church lets them down, which I think probably is the catalyst to start the deconstruction process. But then they leave that community. They don't go get another community because they're so afraid that this community would probably be just like the one I just left.
Sure.
And so now I'm doing it in isolation, or I'm doing it with people who aren't trying to construct.
I was just going to say the isolation or the echo chamber.
Yeah.
The two dangers.
And so you get into this environment where people go, good for you, you're deconstructed. All of that was bad. And they don't have the same value. So now all of a sudden it's someone confirming your doubts, and they're not even pushing back because there's no value for them to push back because they think being set free from all of those restrictions is the way to be. And that's the danger of it is if the people let you down and you get isolated, then I think you're going to continue the deconstruction without the ability to reconstruct. So that would lead me to a question. Okay, so we're acknowledging church hurt is very real. Yeah. It's a very real thing. You're going to be let down. What would be your suggestion if someone was a part of a church And there was just whatever it was that led to the hurt, to you starting the process of deconstruction, and you had to leave that church. What advice would you give them in order to put themselves in a safe place to continue the process of deconstruction, but also the process of fixing it? So the brick analogy of, okay, this brick is bad. We all can acknowledge it, but how can they discover what bricks are bad versus is everything bad? And then how do I put new bricks in?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to this. I would say, number one, reflect on your experiences with God that are real. I think one of the things that happens is almost becomes this loop of we suddenly have this like self-doubt and we start to question, again, was any of this real? And I think, for a genuine believer who has been in a church, even if they've experienced, again, massive church hurt, betrayal, let down from a leader, whatever it is, again, and I want to reiterate what you said, it is very real for some people. Some people have gone through some really, really serious stuff that has hurt them. But I would say reflect on that, remember that. It's one of the main themes you see in scripture. Like one of the dangers for us as Christians is to forget right. the faithfulness of God, to forget the moments where God has shown up, to forget the moments where we've seen and tasted the goodness of God. So reflect on that and realize that those are anchor moments in your life. I would say the other thing is, I don't know how many people who are deconstructing, and maybe they are, I don't have any way to like gauge this, but are you actually going to God and wrestling with God about these things first and foremost? Like, are you bringing your doubts to God? Are you bringing your frustrations to God? Are you bringing your hurt and your anger to God? It's one of the things that I love. Like we've talked about so many times before, God is good enough and big enough to handle it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I love, like when I read through the Old Testament and I read David and some of the Psalms and some of the prophets who are just so frustrated, shaking their fist at God because they don't understand and they're questioning. And I love that, like as a doctrine, like we believe that God cares about us, that he hears our prayers, that he wants us to run to him. The danger is not that we feel those things. The danger is that when we feel those things, it causes us to run away from God, not to run to him. So I would say that's another thing, like bring those things before God and believe in simple faith that God is going to meet you there. Like if you're earnestly seeking the truth, if you earnestly want to know, despite your doubts, despite your questions, despite your hurt, if you want to know the truth about who God is and what the pathway is going forward, bring that to him. And I just believe God honors those who earnestly seek him. Yeah. And then I would say, this one is trickier because if you're leaving your church community, I would go as far as to say, even if that happens, there's probably a good chance you have a few decent like people in your life that you can trust. And I would say if there are those people, if anybody has the heart of Christ in this, they're gonna want to know about it. They're not gonna want you to be in isolation, to feel like nobody cares or nobody understands. I do think that's one of the lies with this is, what are people going to think of me? I think this is actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, but maybe we could talk about it a little bit more. I think part of the problem is the way that churches have dealt with these types of things in the past is that we've not reinforced the idea that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to wrestle. And so what that's done is it's reinforced this idea that I have to be in isolation because if I talk about this, then my faith will be questioned. I'll be looked down upon. And so I would say, examine your life, take inventory and say, are there any people in your life that you can just have an honest conversation with and say, hey, I've been dealing with this. I've been wrestling with these thoughts, these questions, these doubts. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Be open with someone. And I realize there's a vulnerability in that because it takes some level of trust, which is why I'm not saying you should go do that with anyone and everyone. But if there are some people in your life that have shown you the genuine fruit of Christ, where they've loved you, they've been faithful, not perfect, but there's someone that you think you could trust, be willing to have a conversation with them, because I do think it's so incredibly important that we don't go into isolation and we don't just go to the echo chamber for people to reaffirm maybe the doubts that we're already having.
Yeah. Earlier I was talking about church hurt and I made like a passing statement. I said I'd come back to it. One of my problems that I have with church hurt is in modern day culture, it seems like oftentimes when it's discussed like on social media and different types of videos, it's used as an excuse to break community. Almost as if like that empowers you to do it. And it's like, you should do that. And where I'm uncomfortable with that is, so like, and I have to be careful how I use my words. I am never, ever condoning any type of true abuse in any level, in any way. That's not what I'm talking about. But the reality of it is the message that's being delivered, the message of the cross is being delivered by sinful and broken people across the board, of which all of us are.
Yeah.
And we cannot disqualify the message because the messenger fails or the messenger sins.
Right.
That is the gospel message, that we're going to sin, but grace is available to us. And so when people leave, if it is a truly broken community, that you have to create separation, which there are times for that, to then look at a community and say, I'm only going to find a community that now reaches a standard of perfection. Well, you'll never find that, nor is that biblical, and that's not even healthy. You need to be around community of people who are broken. I had someone recently that was engaging me on social media and was throwing shade at our church. And in the context, it wasn't the most disrespectful thing. So when I say throwing shade, they weren't being like belligerent, but they were just saying like, you're doing it wrong, this and that. And so I was engaging them politely. And then in the course of the conversation, they said, I don't go to your church, and I don't go to any church right now because I haven't been able to find a church that perfectly teaches what Jesus taught. And I was like, oh, I could in this moment just spend some time there.
Yeah, that's tough.
But I thought, oh, so you're critiquing the church and you don't want to be a part of the church. And in my mind, I go, that the problem is you in that situation. But I would say the same thing. If we're deconstructing and we're saying, I can't be a part of a community because the community is not perfect enough, then at that point we become the problem and we're being deceived.
Yeah.
What God would want us to do is in that community, understand there is going to be brokenness.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to eventually fall short of that standard, but that's the beauty of why the gospel works, and allows you to, in my opinion, to properly construct, because you realize, okay, we fail.
Yes.
There's grace. That's the message.
Yes.
That's the message of hope.
100%. Yeah. The church is the embodiment of the message of the gospel. So when I fail, when I fall on my face, I receive grace and I receive compassion, and I'm welcomed again, right?
Yeah.
Like, because that is what Jesus does for me. And therefore we are supposed to do the same thing to other people.
Absolutely.
And the problem is we're actually reiterating the cultural narrative, which I know you've talked about a lot, which is like the cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
It's this idea of like we are so inconsistent in our metric because we would want nobody to treat us that way. It's like the moment you mess up, okay, we're done. Like, we're cutting you off. We don't want a relationship with you. And nobody wants that. It's kind of the joke, like we want grace for ourselves and justice for everybody else.
Yeah.
And I do think it's so important that the church is not perfect. It never will be, because of what you said. It's composed of imperfect, fallen people who have been and are being redeemed by Christ. And that's an ever-growing process. So maybe that's even a part of this that people don't understand. Like, when we become Christians, yes, we're justified in the sense that we are put in right standing with God, right? Our sins are forgiven, but there's this thing in theology called sanctification, and that's being made like Christ, which is a progressive thing, which assumes there's times where we're not going to be like Christ. Yeah. That one of the works of the Holy Spirit is he's working in our lives to teach us, to give us conviction of our sin, to repent of our sin, to change our patterns, our behaviors, to when we hurt a person, instead of what we used to do, which was just to shrug it off and go on with our lives, when we hurt a person, to humble ourselves and to ask for forgiveness, to apologize. So we are being made like Christ. But because that's the case, there's going to be this inevitable reality that we're going to hurt people, we're going to let people down, and we're going to be hurt, and people are going to let us down. But we have to remember, like, we're called to embody this beautiful message that we ourselves receive from God. And it's actually supposed to be good news to the world, that people actually would understand that they can come into the church as an imperfect, broken, sinful person and know that they're going to be welcomed, know that they're going to receive grace, know that there's going to be people that walk alongside them in this journey of faith, just like we want people to do that for us. And there's going to be times where people disappoint us, but we have to remember what's at stake. Now, I mentioned to you before, and I'm just curious if there's things off the top of your head. Obviously, you've been a lead pastor for a while now, but are there things that we have done, like as we think about the Western church, are there things that we have done, maybe certain practices that have actually reinforced or maybe even expedited this deconstruction process? In other words, as we look at the church today, is the church, at least in part, at fault for this deconstruction that seems to be more and more prevalent, or at least more and more public because of social media? Is the church to blame? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I think a couple of things that the church has done poorly throughout the years, and when we're saying church, we're talking about the universal church, not just specifically ours. So I would say ours falls in these categories, and some of them, is I think we haven't created a culture where it's okay to struggle, where it's okay to have doubts. I think one of the negatives of modern day Christianity is almost the concept of systematic theology. And I'm not against it in the general practice of learning about theology, but when you reduce theology down to, okay, now these are the absolutes, the systematic, where I think we both would agree, almost every book you read that's systematic theology, there's parts of it you'd go, well, I don't know I agree with that part of it or that part of it.
Sure.
But we've had such absolutes in theology. And then the image that we give to the church is a Christian doesn't have problems. And again, I would say this is probably a little bit more old school Christianity. I really do think that the modern day evangelical church, for the positive, is becoming more authentic in a lot of the struggles and acknowledging it. And I think that really is a good thing. But I think for a long time, they were just reducing it down. Okay, you have to agree with these principles and we're not going to struggle. And I think that's probably been the biggest hindrance, because the people who have some doubts about it has been met with, if you come to your pastor and say, I have some doubts about this theology, in many churches, that was a place to be rebuked. It was a place to say, well, then you need to get more into the word.
Right.
And there hasn't even been grace to say, it's possible you're right, or why don't we walk together through this journey and discuss this, and even to celebrate it, to even celebrate the fact that you're asking questions.
Yeah, thanks for coming to me.
Yeah, and wrestling with your faith. That's great. I mean, that's where I'm at as a dad. My sons are bringing stuff to me, and I'm going, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it. Thank you for wrestling with this. And I'm saying to them consistently, and I keep, as their dad and pastor, I keep saying to them, guys, I'm not positive on all of this. This is my perspective. Here's why. And that's even how I communicate to them. I think this, and here's why, but I could be wrong. And if you ever, in one of your classes, discover something, let's talk again about it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's been missing. And so a lot of people have, when they have doubts, they don't feel there's a safe place.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they just go to the place that is safe. And it's the people who are doubting. It's the people who are tearing down. They go to them to find their information, and then they deconstruct. And again, the other part about it is, I think for pastors, and I understand why this, I'm not in any way throwing shade at pastors. Pastors have felt like the image they need to give off is one of just absolute, like, I'm in a solid place. I don't struggle.
Yeah.
I'm walking in victory, because unfortunately people can be pretty nasty. And if pastors let their shortcomings be learned or exposed, some people will throw that back in their face. I mean, I've had that throughout the years, not often, but I have had it where I'm sharing on a Sunday something I've struggled with. Later on, someone who gets mad at me throws that in my face. And I think, well, you're reinforcing my own insecurities. But But all that said is, like, I know for me, and I don't know if you can speak to this too in a moment, there are things that I've had to deconstruct. There's some things that right now in this moment, I'm wrestling with God with. I'll share one just to not just act in general terms. And I've shared this more in private. The healing power of God is a confusing thing to me. Why he heals some people and not others.
Yeah.
I have personally experienced supernatural physical healing. I fell off a ladder, damaged my back. It created problems for me for years. I mean, to the point where I was having a hard time sleeping and eating. And in a moment, it was healed to never have a problem again. There's no doubt in my mind that was a supernatural healing moment. And then I've prayed for other things and it doesn't get healed. And I pray for people that I love, people that I would give anything for them to be healed, even of simple things, not even life-threatening things, just simple things that God could heal in a moment, and he hasn't done it. And I've had conversations with God where initially, I honestly was kind of surfacey, like, God, will you please heal this person? Will you please heal this person? Like, and in my mind, I'm kind of annoyed. And in my mind, I'm kind of like feeling frustration, but I didn't want to vocalize it because I didn't want to be arrogant. I didn't want to be disrespectful. I didn't want to be disciplined. You know what I mean? Like in my own thoughts. And then I eventually got to a place where I've had to even recently say these words to God. It sounds weird saying this out loud. I haven't said this to anyone else, where I've said to God, I have to be honest with you. I'm struggling with this. And this is causing me to even wrestle with, how do I teach about your healing power? Because like in the past, I saw it so frequently. This person healed, this thing healed, this, and then all of a sudden it feels like this one situation. Why aren't you doing it? And so like I had to come to that place where I go, I'm not sure right now how I feel about this one topic. The whole house is not coming down. I don't know about this. And so God, can we wrestle with this topic? And so I'm in a process of, I don't know if I'm deconstructing or reconstructing or solidifying. I'm just going, I'm wrestling with this. And I think we have to create an environment where that's more safe to do with people, where they can come in and go, hey, okay, I know you guys just preach like this whole series. This one message, I don't know that I agree with you. And we got to be able to go, okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Tell me more.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Because I think it's even an opportunity for pastoral care in the sense that I think you're talking about like the old generation of pastors that might rebuke someone for not believing or just kind of abiding by a certain doctrine. Like we oftentimes we're so truth oriented in the sense that like we want to correct people rather than say, like, what led you there? You know, like what happened in your life? What precipitated this? What did you experience? What was like this catalyst that led you to this place? Because a lot of times what I'm recognizing is people are wading deep into really, really heavy emotions. You know, it's actually less about what they believe and what they're feeling.
I agree.
And I don't think we have to be careful when we minimize people's emotions. I mean, like you're talking about this is going to sound crazy to say, but like I just was going through a season, a couple months, and I shared this with the church. I shared it on Facebook, and it was funny what you're talking about because I'm similar to you. And I think human beings in general, like we don't like to show vulnerability, but especially when you're in a position of leadership and pastoral leadership, you do want to project to some degree, like, you know, we're in a good place and we're capable of leading people because people want to be led and people want someone that they can trust. And yet there is a power also in being vulnerable. I had so many people come up to me, like ask me how I was doing and even thank me for being honest about that, which is such a blessing. But I remember like in the thick of this, the last 2 months, I've shared with you, some of the emotions that I was experiencing were some of the heaviest emotions I've experienced in 34 years on this earth. Things that didn't fully make sense to me, which is part of the reason. There was multiple variables why I'm convinced it was spiritual warfare. But I remember like there was actual thoughts in the midst of this is like, I feel abandoned by God right now. That's how I felt. And I articulated that even talking to my wife. And now simultaneously, did I believe that's true? No, like I don't believe God abandoned me. I didn't believe it, but I was honest about how it felt. And I think that's a big part of this too, is even just giving permission for people to feel in such a way that it maybe feels like a paradox, right? What I believe to be true and what I'm feeling in this moment. Because I think we live in a culture today where somehow it feels disingenuous, right? To say like, well, I believe this, but right now I don't feel it. And so we think, well, if I feel this way, well, then that must be true, or I must not believe it, because we've done a really poor job of allowing people, as you said, to just not be okay, or to say like, I'm in a season of doubting. I'm in a season of wrestling with God. I'm in a season where I believed in the healing power of God, but I lost a family member to cancer. And like, I'm having to reassess that. And I'm frustrated right now. I'm frustrated that I believed that God could do this and he didn't. Yeah. And so I think even just allowing people to feel the weight of their emotions without even necessarily in that moment fixing it and saying like, well, here's the silver bullet scripture that'll fix your perspective on this. A lot of times I don't think that's what it is. I think people need a pastoral presence or just the presence of a godly person who can sit with them and just say, like, I get it. This sucks. Like what you're experiencing is it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. And I see you in the midst of this. And I think because we haven't created much space for that or given allowance for that, or at least people feel that pressure inwardly, I think they feel like, well, it must mean that I don't have faith. It must mean that I don't believe. And therefore, there's no place for me here. And so then I go into isolation, or I go into the echo chamber of people who feel the same way that I do, because I don't believe that tension can actually coexist.
Yeah, that's so good. I think we sometimes feel like doubt is the sin. Yeah. Right. Because in that we're struggling or questions that we have that's sinful to question. And like you said early on in the podcast, God is big enough to handle it. Yeah. He's not threatened by our questions. And I think about, it's an interaction that we've celebrated numerous times, even on this podcast. I think it's in the middle of Mark, where this man asked Jesus, if you're able, will you do this? And Jesus goes, if I'm able. And the guy goes he says, I believe, but help my unbelief. Yeah. And that passage so resonates with me because like what you were saying, when you're going through that season, here's what you and I can both do. I don't say this in any way arrogantly. We can both in our own minds feel something and give the pastoral answer to ourselves. Yep. We could even quote scriptures to ourselves to perfectly tell us what the truth is, while knowing, well, I feel the other way. Yeah. And so like in those moments, what we're saying is, I believe, but help my unbelief. Yeah. And God's okay with it. And that's what I love about the story, was that man says it, and Jesus does the miracle for him. Yeah. And even in other places, like the man at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus is like, what do you want? And he says, do you want me to heal you? And the guy goes, or basically whatever his question was, the guy doesn't answer the direct question. He just goes like, well, no one's here to put me into the pool,
Yeah.
and so he doesn't have any faith at all.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus heals him. And it's like one of those things that you see, like he's not put off by authentic wrestling with him. The Psalms, as you mentioned earlier, are the most authentic examples of people just talking real with God. And that's what I'm learning to do in my own life, because if I don't learn to speak authentically, then those areas to me just become unstable bricks in my life that do naturally deconstruct or fall apart.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden something else happens and everything comes crashing down. And so I'm learning to say to God, I know the truth. I can quote Romans 8:28, right? I know all things are working out for good for those who love God, called according to his purpose. I know these things, but your choice to do this has wounded my heart. Like, I know you love me, and I know eventually this is going to work out for good. There's no doubt in my heart, but right now you've wounded my heart.
Yeah.
And to be comfortable saying that, knowing that God's not offended by that authenticity, and that's what we need to do. Like, even in our culture, in the Tree.Church, we recognized this years ago, that too much of the worship songs were all about victory and not enough about the Psalms where someone goes, my friends are betraying me.
Yeah.
My enemies rise up around me.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like you have abandoned me. Like you said, you felt over the last couple of months where you're going, God, I'm having emotions that I've never had before, and you're not fixing it right now, even though I'm doing what I need to do. And so we started having more songs that talked about struggle. We started having the prayer time in the beginning, even our calls to prayer saying, we know we're struggling, we're hurting, but that's what people need in order to feel safety.
Yeah, no, and I do. I think it's both and. So it's our view of God and our view of the community that we belong to, because at the end of the day, our community as a church should represent the heart of God. And so it's like, I think one of the things that happens is we talk about, although some people grew up in churches where maybe they never heard this idea that God could handle their doubts and their frustrations. But I think even there's a disconnect at times where even if we talk about that, we talk about the grace of God. We talk about come as you are. God will meet you in the middle of your mess or your situation or your brokenness or your addiction or your sin. God is going to meet you there. And we talk about God that way, which is great because I believe that that's true. But at the same time, I think there are churches where we disconnect from our theology, what we believe about God to be true in our actual practice. And so part of this, I think, is even up to us, not just as pastors, to be honest and be able to, when we have those opportunities, whether it's the call to worship, which I love that you mentioned that, because it's actually one of my favorite things now at the Logan campus to be able to do that. And just to start off to say, like, we know we're here to be reminded of God's faithfulness and his goodness. But we also know some of you came in here not feeling like worshiping right now. You came in here because you've been kicked and you're beaten down by life and your situations. I love to be able to like even just share that, because I want people to know like they can be at ease, that they're in a place where it's okay to feel like that. There is no tension in that. They don't have to wonder, should I be here right now because I'm feeling this way? Absolutely, you should be here.
Absolutely,
because God wants to meet you in the midst of that. But I think one of the things that can happen is we can talk about God that way, and then we disconnect with the way that we practice. So as pastors, we should talk about that. And again, it's a tricky thing, like being vulnerable, being open, being honest. But I think we should do that because I think it helps people. But also for those who are listening, who are members of the church, we have to remember that that's an important part for other people. And so when we're honest about our struggles, whether it's at a connect group or, we're getting lunch with someone, I think it reminds people that they're not alone. I think it's one of the great lies of the enemy. That you're the only one. You're the only one who's struggling with this. You're the only one who's having a hard time believing. You're the only one caught up in that sin. Like when we feel that way, we naturally are tempted to pull away from the community. And once we pull away from the community, we stop hearing the voice of truth. We stop having the affirmation of people who care about us, and we slip away. And that's what you see happening with a lot of people. And so I think it's really important that we're talking about these things and being open and honest to say, hey, God can handle your doubts. Hey, we know some of you came in here struggling this morning. We're glad that you're here. And we believe God will meet you in the midst of that. And hey, like we want you to know that if you're struggling, we want to walk with you. And we also want you to know as our people that it's okay to share those things with each other, because we're all in this journey of faith together. And I think all of those things combined eventually over time, hopefully shapes the culture in a church where people feel like there's a safety and a security being honest about really where they are. Because the truth is, all of us are going to be in one of those valleys at one point in time. It's really not a question of if, it's a question of when. We're going to be there at some point in time. And when you're in the midst of that valley, you have to be able to feel secure in that God is able to handle my doubts and my frustrations. The church community that I'm a part of, they love me regardless if I'm feeling this way right now, and they still want me around. And I think when people feel that way, that's what allows even a more redemptive view of deconstruction to happen, to say, it's okay to be wrestling with these things. It's okay to re-examine these things. You're in a community where you're safe and secure to be able to do those things.
You know, it's interesting. You just shared about what you've gone through the last couple of months. After the fact, we both discovered of each other that we were both going through very similar things at the same time. What was interesting, the day that you came in to talk to me about it, I was literally just getting done with a meeting with Brandon and Chris, where I was sharing with them that I was going through a situation that honestly I felt very isolated in, and I was having a spiritual attack, but I hadn't even put my finger on that side of it. Though I'm conscious in my mind that like I'm always a target of spiritual attacks. It was just like there was so much in just the physical world that I was just like focused on, that I was like, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. I'm frustrated. Brandon and Chris both prayed with me. And then like, so I went from being ministered to, but still in a somewhat bad place, just frustrated. They walk out not too long after, you come in and we talk, and I'm like, it was in that moment, it was like, boom.
Well, what's funny is I texted all three of you, which I didn't know that. Like I didn't know that obviously you guys had talked, and I had sent a text message initially to all three of you to let you know about what I was going through, which is, and I even said in the text, like, this is not something I normally do, but like, I'm feeling so genuinely overwhelmed right now that like, I don't know what else to do. And I just need to let you guys in on this to pray for me.
I know. So in that moment you received care, and that brought breakthrough for me. That someone that I respect is going through it, and it like opened my mind and heart. And literally I've told them that was the day for me that my breakthrough happened. Like it shifted so fast in both the spiritual and the physical that from that day going forward, I was like set free. And then we walked through your situation for the next couple of weeks. But it was just one of those things where I was like, that's the beauty of community. And even for us on the pastoral side, to have the pastoral community that we can be authentic with each other, to go, man, I'm really struggling. And we brought freedom from that. Okay. I want to pivot just for a second. And then with our remaining time, I want to come back and just talk about some unhealthy and healthy practices. Okay. When we talk about deconstruction, here's the fact that we just have to acknowledge there are some things that God commands that are 100% countercultural, and you can try to deconstruct, but you're going to come to a place where you realize I have to choose between God and culture, because God stands on the opposite side. For a person who is struggling with that because some of the truth maybe confronts behaviors in their own life, maybe confronts their own identity, the more popular ones right now with the issue of gender and sexuality, and even just how we view ourselves. Maybe it's someone in their life that is embracing a different lifestyle than what Scripture says, and they know in order to embrace this truth means they have to actually then view that behavior differently. They can still love that person, but view it differently. And they're just getting to that place where they're going, man, I don't know that even though God might declare this as true, I don't know that I want to accept it. What advice would you give them, a loving but pastoral advice would you give them to say, it's so important to build your foundation with solid truth and not culture. This is why I would tell you, you should trust God.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to some of the foundational things that we said earlier. I think it's some of those deep rooted things. Like if God really is the loving creator, if we just start there, if he created everything and he's also loving, that means everything that he has made in the intent that he made it for has a good purpose. And so I think one of the things that happens, particularly when we're talking about sin or certain behaviors, is that we have this idea that God like made an arbitrary list of things that he just didn't like. And what we have to understand is everything that God has done, is doing, and will do is consistent with his nature and his character.
And so founded on his design of us.
Founded on his design. And so because he's good and loving, when he created us and he said, these are things that you're going to do and these are things you're not going to do, here's the boundary lines. Understanding that that's for our good, it's for our flourishing, that there is a way that we were designed to function
Mm-hmm.
individually, the way that we think, the way that we interact with other people, the way that we interact with the world. If the other part of that is true, that I am fallen because of sin, and we all know that this is true, whether we put it in that theological category or not, we all know that we're in error. We all know that we mess up, that we've all had horrible things that we've thought, said, and done. Like we just know that that is true. My question would be, why do you feel so confident to trust your own judgment?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the things that's happening in our culture is what we're actually saying to a person. And I think this is actually what's crushing our culture in the next generation is we're saying, you got to figure all this out on your own. Yeah. You gotta draw up your own foundation for life and figure yourself out. And we've removed some of these pillars that have for so long upheld society in understanding some of the basic aspects of human life. And so, questioning whether or not a person is male or female, and like even just some of those basic things, I think it's led to a deeper place of confusion. But to say that, number one, with culture, it's always been a moving target. I mean, look throughout the decades and the centuries, it's always changing.
Which means it's an experiment.
I know we're talking about that. Yeah. It's an experiment. And not only that, but the concept of progress is an illusion. And the reason why progress is an illusion is because to say that we're progressing means that there's a static goal or a standard. Now, here's the question. If that's true and God does not set the standard, who sets the standard? Yeah. Who gets to say whether or not we're moving closer or further away from what is good, right, and true? Mm-hmm. It's the classic example. If there is not an objective lawgiver who tells us what is right and wrong and what is good and what is true, then it is a free-for-all. We're making this up as we go. And if we're fallen and if we're broken and if our minds have been corrupted by sin, we don't know what is up from down. We don't know black from white. Like we have no ability to actually navigate this incredibly complex world. But at the end of the day, you have to recognize you are going to submit to an authority. Yeah. You're going to submit to the lordship of Jesus, that what he says is true, that he's the true God and what he says is final. You're going to submit to your own judgment, or you're going to submit to the ever-changing views of our culture. And at some point in time, whether you recognize that or not, you're going to submit to something. And I've just simply found trusting myself never goes well. Trusting culture doesn't seem to produce the results that it promises. And yet every time that I have trusted Jesus, even when it's hard, that I have found life, joy, and fulfillment, even in those difficult seasons, even in the moments of doubts and questioning, that there is something that Jesus alone can offer that you cannot find within yourself and you cannot find from culture.
All right. So this last section, what I'm going to do is I wrote down 5 unhealthy ways to deconstruct, and then I'm going to do 5 healthy ways. I'm going to read my list of 5, and I want you to pick one of them to talk about, okay? Okay. So that allows me to give my list, but also to dive in a little bit deeper. You got about 2 minutes each one, though, okay? Does that make sense? All right. So you got to pick one of these 5. All right. Okay. So I think these are 5 unhealthy ways to deconstruct. I think letting the hurt or anger drive the process. So someone lets you down at church, whatever, you're letting that drive the process. Okay. So hurt or anger drive the process. Number 2, rejecting all authority or tradition outright. Just rejecting it all. Number 3, building theology from emotion or culture. 4, cutting off community that I've already talked about. And 5, confusing questioning with unbelief.
Yeah, I'll pick number 5. I think this is such an important part of this conversation. I think some of the other ones we kind of touched on. I think when you are questioning and when you're having doubts, again, I would just say to people, the Bible allows for this. And not only does the Bible allow for this, I would say it encourages it, because the fact that we have in the very scriptures itself, the men and women of God, some that we would say the kind of are in the Hall of Fame of faith, right? They were people who had questions and they wrestled with God. And I think of Thomas as one of my favorite examples, that Thomas, who's known as Thomas the Doubter, which I feel like is honestly, it's kind of an unfair title and name, right? Thomas the Doubter.
It should be Thomas the Normal.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, he just was logical. He's like, I saw Jesus get killed. There's no shot I'm going to believe him unless he shows up here, right? Yeah, And what I love about that is that Jesus doesn't rebuke him. In fact, Jesus not only doesn't rebuke him, Jesus meets him in the 100%. Very place that he needed to be met. And here's the thing that I love about Thomas is Thomas didn't just cut off. He didn't say there's no way I'll ever believe. He said, basically, I want to believe, but here's the criteria for belief is basically I need Jesus to meet me here. And I think that's really what we're saying with deconstruction. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have doubts. bring those to God, right? Bring those to God, knowing that he is able to meet you there, knowing that just because you have questions, just because you have doubts, just because you have frustrations or even angry with the way God handled a situation that you didn't expect him to handle it that way, or you wanted him to handle it another way. That doesn't mean your faith isn't real. Doesn't mean God isn't real. And that in this process, just like Thomas, I love this because the story with Thomas, it ends with him making the strongest declaration of Jesus' divinity. He literally says, "My Lord and my God." I mean, just the clearest expression of Jesus' lordship and divinity. And yet he's known as Thomas the Doubter. And so I think my encouragement to people would say, your questions and your doubts can actually lead you to a stronger faith. Do not believe the lie that because you have those things, you simply have to pull away from the church community. You have to reject God and reject faith outright, but realize those can be building blocks to actually strengthen your faith.
That's great stuff. All right, last one. These are the 5 healthy ways to deconstruct. And some of them are just obviously the opposite, but I would say start with the goal of finding truth, not proving doubt.
Yeah.
2, do it in community, not isolation. 3, stay rooted in Scripture. 4, pray for humility and discernment. And 5, be patient and willing to rebuild.
Yeah, I'll go number 5 again. I think one of the things that happens is in our culture, I always call it like our fast food culture or our Amazon 2-day shipping culture. We expect the silver bullet answers to most things in life, right? We like having convenience. We like having comfort. And I think most of us as Americans, probably more than any other culture in the world, we are so ill-equipped to sit in our discomfort. I mean, I'm just as much a part of that as anybody, right? Like I don't like feeling uncomfortable. I don't like being in a place where I feel unsettled. I mean, what I shared with you even this last 2 months, there's been a part of me that I rejoice what God has done and is doing. Right. But there's also another part of me that was begging God, please get me out of this position. I just want this to end. And I think that sometimes that mindset and idea causes us to cut corners, if you will. And we short circuit the process of, rather than allowing God to meet us in the midst of it, rather than allowing us to truly wrestle and even to be more introspective to say, what's going on here? Like, what is it that I'm really wrestling with? What is it that hurt me? What is it that started this whole process to begin with? And really take the time to process that with God, to process that in healthy community, to be fully honest with ourselves, to let us feel the weight of our pain or betrayal or hurt or doubt or whatever it is. I think one of the things that we do is we try to short circuit that process and fast track it. And I think when we try to do that, we do not get the results that we could have had if we were willing to be patient, to sit in that, to allow God to meet us there, to allow the answers to come to the surface over time. Instead, I do think it's one of those things where we would rather run to the echo chamber because then I can just pull the plug. I don't have to deal with this. I don't have to deal with the tension that I'm feeling right now in my mind and my heart. Just tell me what I'm feeling is valid. Okay, it's valid. You're right. None of this is real. Okay, I can pull the plug and move on with my life. And unfortunately, I think that is what happens with some people, rather than actually taking the time to allow God to meet us there and to realize, no, there are answers. Yes, there's a mystery to the Christian faith. Yes, there's going to be some element of paradox and tension that we always face in the Christian faith, but there are answers in that because we believe God is real and that he honors those who earnestly seek him, we have to be committed to that process and just believe that he will meet us in the midst of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for not just your wisdom, but even sharing your personal stuff. Sure. I think that really helps everyone that's listening to feel more connected to it because they can relate to what you're going through. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.